The council chamber stretched so far that the opposite wall disappeared into artificial mist. Ambassador David Kane stood on a platform that floated in the center of an enormous spherical room. Above him, below him, and all around him sat representatives from 800 alien civilizations. Some breathed methane. Others existed as patterns of light. A few were so massive they appeared on holographic screens instead of attending physically. David had seen images of this place. Every human diplomat studied the Grand Council chamber before their first assignment, but nothing prepared him for the reality of standing here, alone, surrounded by species who had conquered the stars while humanity still lived in caves. Human representative. The voice came from everywhere at once, translated into English by systems humanity barely understood. You stand before the Galactic Council to answer for your species' actions. David looked up at the first tier, where the most powerful civilizations sat. The Vrex Dominion, whose empire spanned 2,000 worlds. The Keldon Assembly, masters of gravitational technology. The Thyran Compact, whose fleets could sterilize planets from orbit. I'm honored to address the council, David said. His voice sounded small in the vast chamber, but the translation systems carried it to every corner. You should be terrified, said a voice from the second tier. David recognized the speaker as Ambassador Relax of the Keldon Assembly. She was 3 meters tall, with skin like polished copper and eyes that saw into spectrums humans couldn't detect. Your species has violated the colonization accords. You have settled on worlds marked for preservation. You have extracted resources without authorization. You have ignored 14 separate warnings to cease your expansion. David remained calm. He had prepared for this his entire career. The colonization accords were written 5,000 years before humanity developed spaceflight. We weren't part of the negotiations. We didn't agree to the terms. The chamber erupted in sounds that the translators rendered as anger, contempt, and disbelief. Rylax's skin darkened to the color of old blood. The accords apply to all species capable interstellar travel, she said. Ignorance is not an excuse. You will cease your unauthorized colonies immediately. You will submit to council oversight of all future expansion. You will pay reparations for resources already extracted. These terms are not negotiable. David pulled a small device from his pocket. Every security system in the chamber activated, but he moved slowly, showing it was just a data pad. May I present evidence? He asked. Evidence of what? This came from High Chancellor Vorn, leader of the Vrex Dominion. His species looked almost reptilian, with scales that shifted colors based on emotional state. Right now, those scales showed irritation. The facts are clear. You violated our laws. Evidence that you knew we would, David said quietly. The chamber fell silent. David activated the datapad, and holographic screens materialized around the chamber. They showed star charts, resource surveys, and colonization projections. 70 years ago, the Council detected the first human fusion drives leaving our solar system. You knew we were becoming an interstellar species. You sent observation teams. You monitored our communications. You tracked our expansion. David highlighted several systems on the star chart. These are the worlds you designated as preserved after you detected our survey missions. Not before, after. Relax leaned forward. You're accusing the Council of setting a trap? I'm stating a fact, David replied. You waited until we invested billions of credits and decades of effort into establishing colonies. Then you declared those worlds off limits. You created a situation where we would either abandon our people or break your laws. He looked directly at Chancellor Vorn. Why? This is absurd, Vorn said, but his scales had shifted to a color David's briefing materials identified as uncertainty. The Council doesn't need to trap lesser species into violations. We could simply prevent you from leaving your system if we chose. Could you? David asked. Because I've studied your military deployments. You have enforcement fleets in every major sector, but they're spread thin. The galaxy is a very large place. You maintain order through reputation and the threat of overwhelming force, not through actual constant presence. He pulled up more data. Humanity controls 9 colony worlds. Small compared to your empires, but significant enough that forcibly removing us would require military action, ships, resources, political will. And here's the interesting part. You haven't taken military action against a developing species in over 3,000 years. Because no one has been foolish enough to defy us. Relax said, or because you've developed other methods. David changed the display to show economic data. Every species that joins the Council undergoes the same process. First, you identify violations of existing law. Second, you offer a choice. Submit to Council authority or face sanctions. Third, the species accepts Council oversight to avoid isolation. Fourth, they become dependent on Council trade, Council technology, Council infrastructure. Within a generation, they can't imagine existing outside the system. The chamber buzzed with conversation. David pressed on. But it all starts with this moment. With making us feel like we're the ones who made a mistake. Like we're lucky. You're giving us a chance to make things right. He looked around at the hundreds of species. Except we're not making a mistake. You are. Explain yourself, human. Chancellor Vorn's scales had turned deep crimson. You're assuming humanity will follow the same pattern as every other species you've encountered. You're assuming we'll be grateful for the chance to join your community. You're assuming we need you more than you need us. David smiled. Those assumptions are wrong. Relax stood, her full height impressive, even in a chamber designed for massive beings. Your species numbers barely 20 billion. You control 9 worlds. Your technology is primitive by our standards. What could you possibly offer that we need? Time, David said simply. The word hung in the air. The Council is old, David continued. Stable, comfortable. You haven't faced a real threat in millennia. Your military tactics haven't changed in centuries because they haven't needed to. Your technology advances slowly because there's no pressure to innovate. You're the most powerful force in the galaxy, and that power has made you complacent. He walked to the edge of his floating platform. Humanity is different. We're young. We're hungry. We're innovative out of necessity because our home world tried to kill us for millions of years. We developed nuclear weapons before we left our planet. We created artificial intelligence that nearly destroyed us. We've survived plagues, wars, and environmental disasters that would have ended most species. And this makes you valuable how? Vorn asked. Because empires don't last forever, David said. Somewhere out there is a threat you haven't encountered yet. A rival power. A cosmic disaster. A technological singularity that disrupts everything you've built. And when that threat arrives, you'll need allies who know how to survive the impossible. You'll need species who innovate under pressure. You'll need humanity. The chamber was absolutely quiet now. But we can't be that ally if you treat us like subjects, David continued. We can't innovate if you control our expansion. We can't contribute if you force us into dependency. So here's my counteroffer. Recognize humanity as an independent civilization. Grant us the same rights as council members without the requirement to submit to your authority. Allow us to develop on our own terms. Impossible, Relax said. The council cannot allow independent powers to operate without oversight. It would undermine our entire authority structure. Then you're choosing short-term control over long-term survival, David said. And that's a mistake. Chancellor Vorn's scales cycled through several colors before settling on something David couldn't identify. You understand that we could simply quarantine your species? Prevent you from expanding beyond your current 9 worlds until you agree to our terms? You could try, David agreed. But quarantines require enforcement. Enforcement requires resources. And resources have limits. How long can you maintain a blockade around 9 star systems? A decade? A century? And what happens to your authority when other species see that humanity resisted for that long? He met Vorn's eyes. You're right that we can't match your military power. But we don't need to. We just need to make the cost of controlling us higher than the benefit. And I promise you, Chancellor, humanity knows how to make things expensive for our opponents. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a new voice entered the conversation. I find this human fascinating. Everyone turned to the highest tier of the chamber, where the eldest species sat. The eternal observers, being so old, they claimed to remember the formation of the galaxy itself. They rarely spoke in council sessions. The observer who had spoken appeared as a cluster of luminous spheres, constantly shifting in pattern and color. Young human, you speak of threats we haven't encountered. Tell me, what makes you so certain such threats exist? David had prepared for many questions, but not this one. He paused, thinking carefully. Because that's how the universe works, he said finally. Nothing lasts forever. Every empire falls. Every age ends. The only question is whether you prepare for the change or let it destroy you. He looked at the observer. You've existed for millions of years. You've seen civilizations rise and fall. You know I'm right. The spheres pulsed with light. Indeed, we have seen what you describe, and we have wondered when the Council would encounter a species that understood this truth. The observer turned to address the entire chamber. We support the humans' proposal. The chamber erupted in chaos. Chancellor Vorn stood, his scales flashing through angry colors. With respect, observer, humanity is too dangerous to leave unsupervised. They admit they developed weapons of mass destruction. They've survived multiple near extinctions through conflict. Giving them independence is asking for future war. Yes, the observer agreed, but attempting to control them guarantees immediate war. The human stands before us, presenting reasonable terms while his species prepares for the alternative. Can you not see the strategy? David kept his expression neutral, but his heart raced. The observer had seen through everything. We grant humanity independent status, the observer continued, with conditions. They will establish an embassy here. They will participate in council sessions as observers. They will agree not to colonize worlds already claimed by other species. In exchange, we will not interfere with their internal development or authorized expansion. Relax shook her head. This sets a dangerous precedent. Perhaps, the observer said, or perhaps it prevents a war that would cost more than any of you imagine. Human, do your people accept these terms? David knew he should consult with Earth. This decision would shape humanity's future for centuries. But the observer had given him an opening that might not come again. We accept, he said. Chancellor Vorn's scales turned black. This is a mistake. Mark my words, in a century, we will regret giving these humans freedom to develop unchecked. The observer pulsed with what might have been amusement. Perhaps, Chancellor, but I suspect that in a century, you will be grateful they developed as allies rather than enemies. Time will tell. David descended from the platform as the council formally voted on the new arrangement. He had won humanity's independence, but as he walked through the vast chamber toward the exit, he couldn't shake the feeling that the observer knew something everyone else had missed. The real test, David realized, was yet to come. 3 months after the council session, Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Terran vessel Pathfinder and watched an alien fleet assemble in the space ahead. 15 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had built. They were Keldan vessels, their hulls gleaming with the metallic sheen unique to their construction methods. "They're holding position at the edge of the system," her tactical officer reported. "No hostile actions yet, but their weapons are powered up." Lisa studied the display. The Keldans had been the most vocal opponents of humanity's independent status. Now they were here, in the Arcturus system, where humanity had established its newest colony. "Open a channel," Lisa ordered. The view screen flickered, and Ambassador Relax appeared. Her copper skin seemed darker than Lisa remembered from the news footage of the council session. "Captain Morgan," Relax said, "I am here to inform you that this system has been redesignated as a protected zone under Council preservation protocols. Your colony is in violation of galactic law." Lisa felt her jaw tighten. "Ambassador, the Council granted humanity the right to expand to unclaimed systems. Arcturus was unclaimed when we arrived 2 years ago." "It was unclaimed," Relax agreed. "Past tense. The situation has changed. The Council has identified this system as critical habitat for a rare species of stellar bacteria. The entire system must be evacuated to prevent ecological damage. Stellar bacteria." Lisa couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "In a system we've been studying for 2 years, without detecting any unusual microorganisms. Our sensors are more sophisticated than yours," Relax replied. "The evacuation order is effective immediately. You have 30 days to remove all personnel and equipment." Lisa glanced at her communications officer, who was frantically typing on her console. She gave a subtle nod. The message had been sent to Earth. "Ambassador, we have 5,000 colonists on Arcturus 3. We've invested 3 billion credits in infrastructure. You're asking us to abandon everything based on a scientific claim you haven't shared evidence for." "I'm not asking, Captain. I'm informing you of a legal requirement." Rylax's expression hardened. "Your independent status doesn't grant you the right to destroy protected ecosystems. If you refuse to comply, the Council is authorized to enforce the evacuation." "With those 15 ships?" Lisa asked quietly. "If necessary." Lisa looked at her tactical officer again. He pulled up analysis on the screen, only she could see. The Keldan fleet could destroy the Pathfinder in seconds. They could bombard the colony from orbit. Humanity had exactly 4 military vessels in this system, all of them lighter and less advanced than a single Keldan ship. "I need to consult with my government," Lisa said. "Can you give us 48 hours before requiring a response?" Relax considered. 48 hours. "But Captain, understand this. The Council's patience with human defiance is not unlimited. You received unprecedented independence. Don't waste it by testing our resolve." The transmission ended. Lisa turned to her crew. "Get me Admiral Hayes, and someone find out if we actually have stellar bacteria in this system." 2 hours later, Lisa sat in a secure conference room aboard the Pathfinder, watching Earth's top military and civilian leaders argue via holographic projection. "It's obviously a setup," General Raymond Hayes said. He was a scarred veteran who had commanded the defense of the Saturn colonies during the mining disputes 20 years ago. "They're manufacturing an excuse to put us back under Council." "Control. We can't know that for certain," said Director Ellen Park of the Diplomatic Corps. "The Council has legitimate preservation protocols. Maybe they did detect something we missed. After 2 years?" Hayes shook his head. "No, this is retaliation for David Kane's performance at the Council. They gave us independence because the Eternal Observers forced them to. Now they're looking for ways to undermine it. So what do we do?" Lisa asked. "We can't fight 15 Keldan ships. We can't evacuate 5,000 people in 30 days. And we can't just surrender without proof they're acting in good faith." Secretary of Defense James Torres leaned forward in his projection. "Captain Morgan, What's your assessment of the Keldon fleet's actual intentions? Lisa pulled up the tactical data. They're positioned to blockade the system, not attack it. Their weapons are hot, but they haven't established firing solutions. My read is they're prepared for enforcement, but hoping we'll comply peacefully. Which means they're not certain they want this fight either, Torres observed. Director Park nodded. A military confrontation would be catastrophic for Council politics. The Eternal Observers made it clear they support human independence. If the Keldons attack us without clear justification, other species might question Council authority. Unless they manufacture justification, Hayes countered. One provocation, one incident they can spin as human aggression, and they have their excuse. Lisa watched the strategic map, thinking, what if we give them what they want, but on our terms? Everyone turned to look at her hologram. Explain, Torres said. They want us to evacuate Arcturus. Fine. We announce we'll comply with the Council's preservation protocols. We begin moving colonists out. Lisa highlighted several nearby systems on the star map. But we take our time. We document everything. We invite independent scientists from neutral Council species to verify the stellar bacteria claim. And we make it very public. Hayes grunted. Force them to either prove their claim or back down. Exactly. If they're telling the truth, we avoid a diplomatic crisis and demonstrate we're willing to follow legitimate Council law. If they're lying, we expose it and strengthen our position. Lisa looked at Park. Can the diplomatic corps make this work? Park was already making notes. We'd need to frame it carefully. Emphasize our respect for Council environmental protocols. Make ourselves look like responsible galactic citizens who care about preservation. She smiled slightly. Play the role of the cooperative junior member while actually buying time and forcing transparency. It's risky, Torres said. If they call our bluff and order immediate evacuation, we're in a worse position than we are now. All our options are risky, Lisa pointed out. This way, at least we control the narrative. Hayes studied the tactical display for a long moment. You'll need to keep your people ready, Captain. If this goes wrong, the Keldons won't hesitate to use force. Understood, sir. The meeting continued for another hour, refining the strategy. When it finally ended, Lisa returned to the bridge to find her tactical officer waiting with new information. Captain, you'll want to see this, he said, pulling up a detailed scan of the Keldon fleet. I've been analyzing their formation. It's not standard for a blockade operation. Lisa studied the positioning. He was right. The ships were spread too far apart, their fields of fire overlapping in inefficient ways. What am I looking at? She asked. A display, ma'am. Those ships aren't positioned to fight. They're positioned to look intimidating. He highlighted several gaps in the formation. A properly motivated captain could punch through this blockade in at least 3 places. Maybe more. They want us to see them as overwhelming force, but they're not actually prepared for combat, Lisa said slowly. That's my assessment. Lisa sat in her command chair, thinking. The Keldons were bluffing. They'd brought enough ships to look powerful, but hadn't deployed them effectively because they didn't actually expect a fight. They were counting on humanity to see 15 ships and immediately surrender. Get me Ambassador Relax again, Lisa ordered. The Keldon appeared on screen a few minutes later. Captain Morgan. I hope you're calling to confirm your compliance with the evacuation order. Actually, Ambassador, I'm calling to inform you of our decision, Lisa said. Humanity recognizes the Council's authority in matters of galactic environmental protection. We'll comply with the preservation protocols for Arcturus. Rylax's posture relaxed slightly. A wise decision, Captain. However, Lisa continued, given the magnitude of this evacuation, we'll need to proceed systematically. We're requesting that the Council send scientific teams to conduct a full environmental survey. We want to ensure we understand the stellar bacteria's habitat requirements so we don't accidentally damage other ecosystems during future colonization efforts. Rylax's expression froze. That won't be necessary. The Council's initial assessment is sufficient. I'm sure it is, Lisa agreed. But as a developing species, we have so much to learn from the Council's environmental expertise. Having scientists here to educate us would be invaluable. We're also prepared to allow independent observers from neutral Council species to participate. Complete transparency. Captain, the evacuation order stands regardless of scientific verification. Of course, Lisa said smoothly. We're not questioning the order. We simply want to learn from it. Surely the Council supports educational cooperation between species? Relax was silent for several seconds. Lisa could almost see the calculations happening behind those alien eyes. Refusing the request would look suspicious. Accepting it would mean bringing in scientists who might not find evidence of the bacteria that supposedly required evacuation. I'll convey your request to the Council, Relax said finally. In the meantime, you should begin evacuation preparations. Absolutely. We're starting immediately. Though with 5,000 colonists and limited transport capacity, the process will take at least 6 months. We'll provide regular updates on our progress. 6 months is unacceptable. You have 30 days. Ambassador, we physically cannot move that many people and their equipment in 30 days. Our largest transport ships hold 200 passengers. The math simply doesn't work. Lisa pulled up logistics data. Unless the Council would be willing to provide transport assistance, we'd be grateful for any support you could offer. Another long pause. Providing transport would mean Keldan ships entering the system, landing at the colony, interacting with human personnel. It would create countless opportunities for incidents, documentation, and further delays. The Council is not responsible for your logistical limitations, Relax said stiffly. Of course not. We'll do our best with what we have. 6 months is our most optimistic timeline, but we'll work around the clock to expedite the process. Lisa smiled. We appreciate the Council's patience with our primitive capabilities. The conversation ended shortly after. Lisa sat back in her chair, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders. Well played, Captain, her executive officer said quietly. You just bought us half a year. Maybe, Lisa said. Or maybe I just gave them time to manufacture evidence of their stellar bacteria. She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the distant Keldan fleet. Either way, we're committed now. Get me a secure line to the colony administrator. We need to start the evacuation for real, but we're going to document every single step. Over the following weeks, Lisa watched the situation develop in ways that confirmed her suspicions. The Council refused to send scientific teams. They denied requests for independent verification. They provided no evidence of the stellar bacteria beyond their initial claim. Meanwhile, humanity's diplomatic corps made sure every civilized species in the galaxy knew exactly what was happening. News broadcasts showed human colonists peacefully packing their belongings, respecting what they portrayed as the Council's environmental wisdom. Opinion pieces asked thoughtful questions about verification protocols for preservation orders. Scientists from neutral species began publicly wondering why the Council wouldn't allow independent confirmation of such an important ecological discovery. The pressure built slowly but inexorably. 2 months into the evacuation, Ambassador Relax contacted Lisa again. Captain Morgan, the Council has reviewed the Arcturus situation. In light of new data, we've determined that the stellar bacteria population is smaller than initially assessed. The system can remain open to limited colonization, provided you restrict development to Arcturus 3 and maintain monitoring protocols. Lisa kept her face carefully neutral. The Council is allowing us to stay? Under specific conditions, yes. Consider it a demonstration of the Council's willingness to work cooperatively with humanity. After the transmission ended, Lisa's crew erupted in quiet celebration. They had won. They'd called the Keldon bluff and forced a retreat. Lisa couldn't shake a feeling of unease. They'd won this confrontation. But it wouldn't be the last. The Council had tested humanity's resolve and found it stronger than expected. Next time, they would come prepared. Ambassador David Kane sat in his office at the New Tehran embassy on Council Station and read the intelligence reports with growing concern. 6 months had passed since the Arcturus incident, and the galaxy's political landscape was shifting in dangerous ways. They're building a coalition, his intelligence chief, Colonel Ryan Nash, said. He was a compact man with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. 15 species so far, all of them opposed to what they're calling human exceptionalism. The Keldons are leading the effort. David studied the list of species joining the coalition. Most were second-tier powers, not strong enough to challenge the Council directly, but collectively significant. What's their stated goal? Officially, to petition the Council for stricter oversight of developing species. Unofficially, Nash pulled up intercepted communications. They want humanity brought back under direct Council authority. They're arguing that our independence sets a dangerous precedent that will destabilize the entire galactic order. Show me the intercepted messages. Nash activated a holographic display. Alien text scrolled past, with English translations appearing alongside. David read through several exchanges, his expression darkening. They're not just talking about political pressure, he said. This is coordination for economic sanctions, trade restrictions, technology embargoes. And if that doesn't work? Nash pulled up military intelligence. The coalition has been conducting joint fleet exercises in the outer territories. Officially, it's routine training. But the scenarios they're running all involve suppressing a rebellious minor power that refuses Council authority. David leaned back in his chair. They're preparing to force us back into submission. The question is timing. When do they make their move? My analysts think within the next 6 months. They're waiting for something that gives them political cover. Another incident like Arcturus, maybe, or evidence they can spin as human aggression. Or they'll manufacture one, David said quietly. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. David checked the security system and felt surprise when he saw who was waiting. Send her in, he told Nash. The door opened, and Ambassador Relax entered. She looked different than she had during their previous confrontations. Her copper skin seemed duller, and she moved with visible tension. Ambassador Kane, she said formally. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Ambassador Relax, this is unexpected. David gestured to a chair. What can I do for you? Relax sat, her large frame making the human-sized furniture look fragile. I'm here unofficially. What I'm about to tell you could end my career if discovered. David and Nash exchanged glances. Go on, David said carefully. The coalition against humanity is more dangerous than you realize. It's not just political maneuvering. There are elements within the group actively planning military action. She pulled out a data device and set it on David's desk. This contains evidence of secret communications between coalition military commanders. They're developing plans for what they call corrective enforcement. David picked up the device, but didn't activate it. Why are you telling me this? You've been one of our most vocal opponents. Because I'm a diplomat, not a warmonger, Relax said. I opposed human independence because I genuinely believed it would destabilize the Council. I still believe that, actually. But what the coalition is planning goes far beyond political opposition. She met David's eyes. They're talking about making an example of humanity, about crushing your species so thoroughly that no other developing civilization will ever dare to challenge Council authority again. Nash stepped forward. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Months, maybe weeks. They're waiting for the right moment to act. Relax stood. I can't stop them. My own government is part of the coalition. But I can give you warning and evidence. What you do with it is up to you. David activated the data device. Information flooded across his display. Military deployments. Communication intercepts. Strategic planning documents. It was intelligence gold. This is incredibly detailed, he said. How did you get access to all of this? I have allies who share my concerns. Not everyone in the coalition supports their extremist elements. Relax moved toward the door. Ambassador Kane, I need you to understand something. The Council has maintained peace for thousands of years through a careful balance of power and authority. Humanity disrupted that balance. Now forces are aligning that could lead to the first major galactic war in millennia. I'm giving you this information because I hope it helps you find a path that doesn't end in catastrophic violence. What path do you see? David asked. Relax paused at the door. I don't know. But I know that if humanity and the coalition go to war, millions will die. Entire civilizations could fall. The galaxy I've spent my life serving will burn. She looked back at him. Find another way, Ambassador, please. Then she was gone. David and Nash spent the next hour analyzing the intelligence. The picture it painted was grim. Coalition forces were positioning assets near human space. Supply lines were being established. Battle plans were being refined. They're serious, Nash said. This isn't saber-rattling. They're actually preparing for war. David pulled up Earth's force deployments. Humanity had expanded its fleet since gaining independence, but the numbers were still modest compared to major council powers. Against a coalition of 15 species? The math was brutal. We need to take this to the Security Council, David said. Show them what the coalition is planning and demand they intervene. Will they? Nash asked. Half the council supported giving us independence. The other half resented being overruled. If we bring this to them, we might just force the issue into open conflict. David stood and walked to the window. Council Station orbited a massive artificial structure that served as the political heart of galactic civilization. Thousands of ships came and went daily. Billions of beings lived and worked here. All of it maintained by the careful balance Relax had mentioned. Get me a secure channel to Admiral Hayes and Secretary Torres, David said. They need to see this immediately. The emergency conference convened 3 hours later. David's hologram appeared in a secure room on Earth, alongside military and civilian leaders. We're looking at potential war within months, Admiral Hayes said after reviewing the intelligence. We need to mobilize now. Pull back our colonies to defensible positions. Recall our merchant fleet. Start producing military vessels at emergency rates. That will look like we're preparing for aggression, Director Park objected. It could trigger exactly the conflict we're trying to avoid. The conflict is already coming, General Torres said. The question is whether we're ready for it. President Sarah Mitchell, who had been quiet during the debate, finally spoke. Ambassador Kane, you've been living among these species for months now. What's your read on the situation? David chose his words carefully. Madam President, I think we're facing a fundamental problem. The council system is based on hierarchical authority. Species progress through levels of membership based on technological advancement and political compliance. Humanity broke that system by demanding independence without going through the usual process. The coalition sees us as a threat not because of what we've done, but because of what we represent. Which is? Mitchell asked. The idea that the council's authority is negotiable, that a species can choose its own path rather than accepting the established order. David pulled up historical data. Every other species that achieved independence did it after thousands of years of council membership. They earned it by proving they accepted council values. We demanded it by threatening to be more trouble than we were worth. That terrifies them. So what do we do? Mitchell pressed. David had been thinking about this since Relax left his office. We change the narrative. Right now, the Coalition frames this as humanity versus the Council. Rebels versus legitimate authority. We need to reframe it as traditionalists versus reformers. We need allies. Which species would ally with us? Torres asked skeptically. Everyone knows we're the outsiders here. Not everyone, David said. He pulled up a list of council species. There are dozens of civilizations that have expressed frustration with the traditional power structure. Species that feel marginalized because they don't have massive fleets or ancient pedigrees. They've stayed quiet because opposing the council seemed futile. But if humanity shows it's possible to stand up to the established order and survive. Park leaned forward, interested. You want to build a counter-coalition. I want to show that this isn't about humanity. It's about whether the council can evolve to accommodate new ways of thinking, or whether it will use force to maintain the old order. David highlighted several species on his list. These are potential allies. Small powers. Developing civilizations. Species that have been waiting for someone to challenge the status quo. Hayes shook his head. That's a political strategy, Ambassador. Politics won't matter if the Coalition's fleets show up at Earth. Then we make sure they don't, David said. We use the time Relax bought us to build alliances, expose the Coalition's war plans, and put political pressure on the Council to intervene. We turn this into a debate about the future of galactic governance instead of a military confrontation. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. It's risky. If it fails, we end up isolated and at war. If we don't try, we end up at war anyway, David pointed out. This way at least we have a chance. The president looked at her advisors. Hayes looked skeptical. Torres was calculating odds. Park was already making notes about potential diplomatic approaches. Do it, Mitchell said finally. Ambassador Kane, you have authorization to pursue alliance building. Admiral Hayes, quietly accelerate our military preparations. We'll hope for diplomatic success, but prepare for the alternative. The meeting ended, and David returned to his embassy. Nash was waiting with more intelligence. The Coalition knows Relax met with you, he said without preamble. They're moving up their timeline. My sources say they're planning to manufacture an incident within 2 weeks that will justify military action. David felt cold dread settle in his stomach. What kind of incident? Unknown. But whatever it is, they're going to make it look like human aggression. Give them the political cover they need to attack. David looked at his list of potential allies. 2 weeks wasn't enough time to build a coalition. It wasn't enough time to expose the conspiracy. It wasn't enough time to do anything except prepare for war, unless he changed the game entirely. Get me a meeting with the Eternal Observers, David said. Nash stared at him. Sir, the observers don't take meetings. They barely participate in council sessions. They've existed for millions of years. Why would they talk to a human? Because they supported our independence, David said. Because they understand the patterns of history better than anyone. And because if galactic war is coming, they might be the only ones who can stop it. Nash nodded slowly. I'll try. But don't expect miracles. David returned to the window, watching the endless flow of ships around Council Station. Somewhere out there, forces were aligning that could destroy everything humanity had built. War was coming, manufactured or real, and Earth was running out of time. He thought of Rylax's plea to find another way. The problem was, David was running out of ways. The message came 3 days later through channels so obscure that David initially thought it was a mistake. The eternal observers would grant him an audience. He had 1 hour to prepare and travel to their sanctuary in the oldest section of Council Station. Colonel Nash accompanied him through corridors that grew progressively stranger as they penetrated deeper into the station. The architecture shifted from modern composite materials to substances that predated human civilization. The lighting changed from standard illumination to something that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "I don't like this," Nash muttered. "We're a long way from friendly territory. If the observers wanted to harm us, they wouldn't need to lure us here," David replied. Though he shared his security chief's unease, they reached a chamber that existed in impossible geometry. The space seemed simultaneously vast and intimate, with walls that curved in directions David's eyes couldn't quite follow. At the center floated the eternal observers, their forms shifting between states of matter in patterns that hurt to watch directly. "Human ambassador," one of them said, its voice like the echo of ancient stars. "You seek our intervention in the coming conflict." David bowed, uncertain if the gesture meant anything to beings this alien. "I seek understanding, observer. The Coalition plans violence against my species. They're manufacturing justification for war. I need to know if the coup Sil will allow this." "Allow?" The observer pulsed with light. "You misunderstand the Council's nature. It is not a unified entity with single purpose. It is a collection of competing interests held together by mutual benefit and carefully balanced power. What the Coalition plans, they plan outside official Council authority. But you intervened to grant humanity independence," David said. "You have influence." "We spoke truth in that moment. We did not command." The observer drifted closer. "Young species, you humans, yet you grasp certain realities that ancient civilizations have forgotten. Tell me, why do you think your species frightens the Coalition so deeply?" David considered the question carefully. "Because we represent change, unpredictability, the possibility that the established order isn't permanent, partially correct." The observer's form solidified slightly, as if focusing its attention. "But deeper than that, you frighten them because you have not yet learned to fear failure. Most civilizations, by the time they reach the stars, have optimized away their capacity for true risk. They calculate. They minimize. They choose certain small gains over uncertain large ones. It has made them stable but inflexible." Another observer joined the conversation, its voice like distant thunder. "Humanity still takes risks, still embraces uncertainty, still innovates not for efficiency, but for survival. This is what terrified the Keldans about Arcturus. Not that you defied them, but that you did so without certainty of success. You gambled on your ability to manage the consequences." David felt a chill. "You're saying the galaxy has become risk-averse." "The galaxy has become old," the first observer said. "Stability has value, but it also has cost. The cost is adaptability. The cost is evolution. The cost is the ability to survive true catastrophe." Nash spoke for the first time. "What catastrophe?" The observers pulsed in unison, and suddenly the chamber filled with images. Stars dying in coordinated patterns. Ships of designs David had never seen emerging from nowhere. Civilizations going dark across entire sectors. "This galaxy has known peace for 10,000 years, an observer said. But beyond the borders we have established, beyond the territories we have mapped, something stirs. Something that has waited for this civilization to grow comfortable, stable, predictable." David stared at the images. "You're talking about an external threat. Something from outside council space." "We speak of possibility," the observer replied. "Of patterns observed across millions of years. Peace never lasts forever. Stability creates vulnerability. When the next great challenge comes, It will not care about council authority or traditional power structures. It will test adaptability, creativity, the willingness to risk everything for survival. And you think humanity has those qualities, David said slowly. We think humanity has not yet lost them. Whether you retain them under pressure remains to be seen. The observer's form shifted. This is why we supported your independence. Not because we care about your political autonomy, but because the galaxy needs species that remember how to survive the impossible. Then help us, David said urgently. The coalition will attack within days. If you believe humanity has value, intervene. No. The word hung in the impossible space. You must face this challenge with your own resources, the observer continued. Intervention would teach you nothing. Victory granted is not victory earned. If humanity survives the coalition's aggression through its own efforts, you prove your value. If you fail, you are not what we hoped. David felt anger rising. You're willing to let my entire species die as a test? We are willing to let events unfold as they will, the observer said calmly. This is not cruelty. This is necessity. The challenges coming to this galaxy will not be gentle. They will not pause for intervention. Species will survive them or perish based on their own capabilities. Better to discover human limits now than during true catastrophe. Nash stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. That's easy to say when it's not your people at risk. We have watched millions of species rise and fall, the observer replied. We have witnessed civilizations that seemed eternal vanish in moments. We grieve each loss while understanding its necessity. The galaxy is not gentle human soldier. It never has been. David forced himself to think past the anger and fear. The observers wouldn't help directly. That was clear. But they had revealed something important. You said the coalition acts outside council authority, he said. Does that mean other council members don't support their plans? Many do not know the full extent of those plans, the observer said. The coalition has been careful to coordinate in secret. They present their actions as enforcing legitimate council interests while hiding their true extremism. So if we expose their actual intentions, we might fracture their support. Perhaps. Or you might accelerate their timeline, forcing action before you are ready. The observer pulsed thoughtfully. Human ambassador, you seek certainty in a situation that offers none. This is your challenge. Act with incomplete information. Risk everything on imperfect strategy. Survive or fail based on judgment rather than guaranteed outcomes. David looked at Nash, then back at the observers. If you won't help directly, will you at least verify information? If we bring evidence of the coalition's plans to the full council, will you confirm its authenticity? The observers were silent for a long moment. That, one of them said finally, would be acceptable. Truth-speaking is our role. If you present genuine evidence of conspiracy, we will not deny its validity. It wasn't the intervention David wanted, but it was something. A way to force the coalition's plans into the light without appearing to manufacture accusations. Thank you, David said. We'll make the most of this opportunity. See that you do, the observer replied, because this may be the only opportunity you receive. The coalition moves soon. What you do in the coming days will shape humanity's future for generations. Choose wisely. The chamber began to fade, or perhaps David and Nash were being transported elsewhere. Either way, the audience was clearly over. They found themselves back in the familiar corridors of modern Council Station. Nash immediately checked the location and established secure communications. That was enlightening and terrifying in equal measure, he said. External threats? The galaxy growing old? What were they really telling us? That we're on our own, David replied, but also that we have leverage. If we can prove the coalition is planning aggressive war, not defensive enforcement, we split their political support. We have Rylax's intelligence, Nash pointed out, which the Coalition will claim is fabricated by humans seeking to avoid legitimate oversight. David was already planning. We need something they can't deny, something that proves their intentions beyond doubt. Nash's eyes widened as he understood. You want to let them manufacture their incident. Let them take the first shot. Not exactly, David said. I want to catch them manufacturing it. Document the whole process. Show the Council that this isn't about enforcing legitimate authority, but about making an example of humanity. That's incredibly dangerous. If we miscalculate, if we don't have evidence in place when they act, Earth could be hit before we can respond. I know. David felt the weight of what he was proposing. But the observers were right about one thing. We can't win this by playing it safe. The Coalition expects us to either submit or prepare for defensive war. We need to do something they don't expect. They returned to the embassy and convened an emergency meeting with Earth's leadership. David laid out the plan, watching faces shift from shock to calculation to grim acceptance. You're proposing we allow the Coalition to attack us, President Mitchell said slowly, while we record the evidence. Not a full attack, David clarified. We identify the most likely scenario for their manufactured incident and position assets to document it. We take the hit, prove it was orchestrated, and bring the evidence to the full Council with eternal observer verification. Admiral Hayes pulled up military deployments. Our intelligence suggests they're targeting the frontier station in the Kepler system. It's our newest outpost, lightly defended, far from Earth. An incident there would be strategically insignificant, but politically powerful. Can we reinforce it without tipping our hand? Torres asked. We can position reconnaissance assets nearby, Hayes replied. Not enough to prevent an attack, but enough to document everything that happens. We'd be sacrificing the station and its personnel to make a political point. The room was silent. How many people are stationed there? Mitchell asked quietly. 237, Hayes said. We can order an evacuation under some pretext. Get the number down to essential personnel only. Which still means people at risk, Mitchell said. People who would die for a political strategy. David thought of the observer's words. Risk everything on imperfect strategy. Survive or fail based on judgment. Madam President, he said carefully, every option we have puts people at risk. If we don't expose the Coalition's conspiracy, they'll manufacture an incident anyway and follow it with full military action. Earth itself will be at risk. This way, we control the scenario and gain evidence that might prevent wider war. Mitchell looked at her advisors. No one spoke. I hate this, she said finally, but I don't see a better option. Proceed with the plan. Minimize casualties, however possible. And Ambassador Kane, you better be right about the observers verifying our evidence. The next 8 days were the longest of David's life. Earth quietly repositioned assets near the Kepler system. The frontier station's non-essential personnel were evacuated under the cover of a training exercise. Intelligence watched the Coalition's movements with obsessive attention. On the 9th day, it happened. 3 unmarked ships appeared at the edge of the Kepler system and accelerated toward Frontier Station. Reconnaissance drones captured everything. The ship's transponders identified them as independent merchants, but their power signatures matched Keldan military vessels. They approached the station broadcasting distress calls, claiming engine failure. When Frontier Station offered assistance, the ships opened fire. The attack was brutal and precise. They targeted communications arrays first, trying to prevent the station from sending distress signals. Then they destroyed defensive weapons. Finally, they began hitting life support systems. But what the attackers didn't know was that Frontier Station's communications hadn't really been disabled. Human engineers had routed backup systems through unconventional channels specifically for this scenario. Every moment of the attack was broadcast in real time to hidden recorders throughout the system. The Coalition ships left Frontier Station crippled, but intact, its crew barely surviving in emergency shelters. The attackers then withdrew to a rendezvous point where they met with a Keldon command ship. The recorded communications between the attacking vessels and their command were damning. Orders to make it look like a pirate raid. Instructions on exactly how much damage to inflict. Coordination on the political messaging that would follow. David had his evidence. He called for an emergency session of the full Galactic Council. The Grand Council chamber assembled. In a way, it hadn't for centuries. Every species with voting rights attended either physically or via holographic projection. The attack on Frontier Station had galvanized attention across the galaxy. David stood once again on the floating platform. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him on the display screens was footage from the attack. Around him in the chamber were representatives from 24 species he'd quietly contacted over the past weeks. Potential allies waiting to see if humanity's gamble would pay off. Chancellor Vorn called the session to order. Ambassador Kane, you have requested this emergency session and made serious accusations against multiple council members. Present your evidence. David activated the holographic systems. The chamber filled with images from Frontier Station. Ships approaching under false pretenses. Weapons fire destroying civilian installations. Communications between the attackers revealing their true nature. These ships, David said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, were registered as independent merchants. But their power signatures match Keldon military vessels. Their weapons match Keldon military specifications. And their communications after the attack confirmed they were operating under orders from Coalition leadership. He played the intercepted transmissions. Keldon voices discussing the success of the operation. Confirmation that the incident would be used to justify military action against human space. Satisfaction that the attack had gone exactly as planned. The chamber erupted in noise. Ambassador Relax stood, her copper skin pale. This is clearly fabricated. Humans attempting to avoid responsibility for their violations of council law by creating false evidence of conspiracy. Is it? David turned to where the eternal observers sat in their highest tier. I call upon the observers to verify the authenticity of this evidence. As they witnessed at our previous session, truth-speaking is their role. The chamber went silent. The observers pulsed with light, their ancient forms shifting as they processed the request. Finally, one of them spoke. We have examined the evidence presented. The recordings are genuine. The communications are authentic. The attack on the human station was orchestrated by Coalition elements operating under official but secret coordination. Chaos exploded across the chamber. Species shouted accusations. The Coalition members who had been confident moments before now scrambled to respond. The careful political alliance they'd built was fracturing in real time. Chancellor Vorn's scales flashed through colors David had never seen. Order! I will have order in this chamber. It took several minutes for the noise to subside. When it did, Relax stood once more. Even if this incident was staged by certain extremist elements, it doesn't change the fundamental issue. Humanity remains a destabilizing force in galactic politics. Their independence undermines council authority. Their continued expansion threatens the order that has maintained peace for millennia. Does it? David asked. He gestured to the species arrayed around the chamber. Or does it threaten the control that certain powerful civilizations have enjoyed for millennia? There's a difference between order and dominance, Ambassador. He pulled up new information on the displays. Over the past week, I've been speaking with representatives from 63 council species. All of them smaller powers. All of them marginalized by the traditional authority structure. all of them interested in an alternative. David highlighted the species on the star map. Together, they represented less than 5% of the Council's military power, but more than 40% of its membership. These species don't want to destroy the Council, David continued. They want to reform it. They want a system where membership isn't contingent on submission to ancient hierarchies, where developing civilizations have rights, not privileges granted at the discretion of dominant powers, where independence is earned through demonstrated capability, not millennia of obedience. A new voice entered the discussion. Ambassador Kale of the Ashen Reach rose slowly, his ancient frame commanding attention through sheer presence. "The human speaks truth," Kale said. "I have watched this council for 6,000 years. I have seen it maintain peace through careful balance of power. But I have also seen it grow rigid, inflexible, resistant to change even when change is necessary." He looked at the coalition leaders. This attack on the human station was not about enforcing legitimate law. It was about punishing defiance, about making an example to discourage others from seeking the independence humanity achieved. "We were protecting Council interests." One of the coalition members protested. "No," Kale said quietly. "You were protecting your own. The Council's interests would be better served by allowing capable species to develop freely, contributing their unique strengths to our collective security. Humanity's insistence on independence isn't rebellion. It's evolution. And if we cannot adapt to accommodate that evolution, we don't deserve to endure." The chamber was riveted now. Kale rarely spoke in sessions, and when he did, even the most powerful civilizations listened. "I propose a resolution," Kale continued. "First, the coalition members involved in planning. The attack on Frontier Station will face censure and be removed from Council security committees. Second, a reform commission will be established to review membership requirements and develop alternatives to the current hierarchical system. Third, humanity's independent status will be formally recognized with full Council rights, serving as a test case for reformed membership protocols." "This is unacceptable," Chancellor Vorn said. "You're rewarding human defiance by giving them everything they demanded." "I'm preventing a war that would devastate this galaxy," Kale replied. "Because make no mistake, Chancellor, if you push forward with military action against humanity now, you won't face them alone. You'll face everyone in this chamber who sees themselves in humanity's position. Every marginalized species. Every developing civilization. Every member who has waited centuries for the chance to challenge the established order." David watched the political calculation happen across dozens of alien faces. The coalition had the military power to crush humanity, but they didn't have the political power to crush humanity and 40% of Council membership simultaneously. The cost would be catastrophic. "The human baited us," Relax said bitterly. "They sacrificed their own station to create political theater." "We documented your conspiracy," David corrected. "There's a difference between theater and truth. You planned aggressive action. We proved it. Now the Council has to decide whether it stands for legitimate order or manufactured dominance." The vote took 3 hours. Species caucused. Alliances shifted. Political debts were called in and promises made. Through it all, David stood on his platform, watching the future of humanity hang in the balance. When the vote finally came, Kale's resolution passed by a narrow margin. The coalition was censured. The Reform Commission was established. Humanity's independent status was formally recognized. David allowed himself to feel relief for exactly 10 seconds before his mind started cataloging everything that still needed to be done. The coalition would be hostile for generations. The reforms would face resistance at every turn. RN. Humanity would need to prove it could contribute to Council security while maintaining independence, but they had won the right to try. As the session adjourned, Ambassador Relax approached David's platform. She looked exhausted, her copper skin dull with stress. "You played this perfectly," she said. "Every move calculated, every risk measured, even sacrificing your own people to make your political point." "We didn't sacrifice them," David said quietly. "We put them at risk, yes, but we also gave them the chance to be part of something larger than themselves, to help secure humanity's future. And if the attack had killed them all, then we would have had even stronger evidence of the Coalition's brutality." David met her eyes. "You asked me once why we thought we could survive against the Council. This is why. Not because we're stronger, but because we're willing to risk everything for outcomes that matter. Your Coalition calculated that we'd submit rather than accept casualties. You were wrong." Relax was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The Eternal Observers told you something, didn't they? About threats coming to the galaxy. About humanity's role." David considered denying it, but Relax deserved honesty. "They suggested that stability has made the Council vulnerable. That when the next great challenge comes, the galaxy will need species that remember how to survive the impossible." "And you believe that's humanity?" "I believe we haven't forgotten how to take risks, how to adapt, how to fight when the odds are against us." David looked around the vast chamber. The Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years through overwhelming power. But power without flexibility is brittle. When it breaks, everything built on it falls. Relax nodded slowly. "Then I hope you're right, Ambassador. Because if you're wrong, if humanity's approach brings chaos instead of adaptation, the cost will be measured in billions of lives." "And if we're right," David replied, "those billions might survive challenges that would destroy a more rigid civilization." Relax extended her hand in the human gesture of respect she'd learned. David shook it, feeling the strength in her grip. "We're not allies," she said. "We may never be allies. But I acknowledge that you've earned your place here." She left, and David was alone on the platform. Colonel Nash appeared a few minutes later, concern on his face. "Sir, we're getting reports from Frontier Station. The crew is safe, but the damage is extensive. It'll take months to rebuild." "Then we rebuild," David said. "And we make sure everyone knows why that station was attacked. Why it mattered. Why 237 people accepted the risk of being there." He looked at the empty council chamber, thinking of all the battles still to come. Political fights. Economic pressure. The slow work of proving humanity deserved the independence it had won. But for now, they had survived. They had defied the most powerful governing body in the galaxy and emerged, victorious. And somewhere beyond the Council's borders, in the vast unexplored darkness, whatever threats the observers had hinted at would eventually arrive. When they did, humanity would be ready, because being ready for the impossible was what humans did best. David left the platform and headed back to the embassy, already planning for tomorrow's challenges. Now the war for independence was over. The work of earning it was just beginning. But as he walked through the corridors of Council Station, passing aliens who now looked at humanity with respect instead of contempt, David allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had done it. Against impossible odds, with imperfect information, risking everything on judgment and strategy, they had won. And that was the most human. Victory of all. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.